It had been years since Julia felt like a wife instead of a doctor. Late nights at the hospital had stolen birthdays, anniversaries, even quiet dinners at home. But tonight was different. A colleague had offered to cover her night shift at the last minute. And instead of collapsing into bed, Julia felt a rare flicker of excitement. For once, she'd be the one walking through the door unexpectedly. She stopped at a small wine shop near their apartment and picked out a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, Thomas's favorite. She remembered how he used to say it tasted like autumn and warmth and stories waiting to be told. Then she ducked into the little gourmet market on the corner and picked up a box of dark chocolate's sea salt caramel, the exact kind he always stole from the box when he thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't his birthday. It was something smaller and somehow more meaningful. It was a gift that said, "I still think about you." Julia smiled to herself as she walked toward their building, heels clicking softly on the pavement. The air was crisp. The sky above Boston was a quilt of stars. For once, life felt simple, warm, steady. But as we all know, life doesn't wait for the right moment to break you. It chooses the quiet ones, the ones you least expect. Julia stepped into the apartment as quietly as possible. She took off her heels in the elevator, holding them by the straps, just like she used to back in college when sneaking in late. She wanted to surprise him, not startle him. The door creaked gently as she opened it. Thomas's car keys were on the entry table. He was home. Her smile deepened. She pictured him in his hoodie, probably watching some old war documentary on the couch, waiting for her. She tiptoed inside, placing the wine and chocolates gently on the kitchen counter. And then she heard it, a sound that did not belong to her world, a soft laugh. Feminine, intimate. It came from the bedroom. Julia froze. She didn't want to believe it. At first, she thought maybe it was the television. Maybe he was watching a movie. But then came his voice. Low, close, intimate. "You're incredible, Diana." Her chest tightened so fast it took her breath. Julia stood in the kitchen still as a statue, her eyes darting toward the hallway. Then came the sound of sheets, rustling, moving, and a sigh, sharp, breathy, not her own. A sound that pierced through every defense she'd built over years of working in trauma wards. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She had walked in expecting love. Instead, she walked straight into a betrayal so deep it shattered her identity in one sentence. Julia's fingers tightened around the wine bag. It trembled in her hand, the bottle clinking softly against the box of chocolates. She took one step toward the hallway. And then she saw them. Shoes, not hers. Bright red stilettos scuffed from city streets, tossed near the closet like someone couldn't be bothered to care. Then came the perfume. Thick, sweet, overpowering, aggressive, the kind Julia would never wear. Her breath hitched as she looked toward the half-open bedroom door. There were shadows moving behind it. And then a woman's voice, carefree and mocking. "I thought your wife would be home." "She's on call till morning," Thomas replied, his voice oozing smugness. "Saving lives or whatever. We've got all night." Julia couldn't take it anymore. She slammed the door shut behind her, hard. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Silence. Then chaos. Rustling sheets, panicked whispers. Thomas stumbled out into the hallway, shirt half-buttoned, hair messy, eyes wide like a child caught lying. For a second, he looked ashamed, but only for a second. Then came the smirk. The familiar mask. "Julia, this isn't what it looks like." Her voice came out cold, hollow. "Really?" she said. "Because it looks exactly like what I think it is." And then she appeared. The woman, tall, blonde, beautiful in a calculated way, wearing Julia's silk robe. The one Thomas gave her for her birthday. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize. She smiled. Small, almost amused. "Diana," she said, like she was greeting a friend at brunch. "Didn't think we'd meet like this. Life's full of surprises." Julia's eyes dropped to the robe. Her robe. Her voice broke into a whisper. "You're wearing my robe." "Oh, I didn't know," Diana replied casually. "Thomas offered it." "But if it bothers you—" She slid a hand down the belt like she might take it off right there. Thomas cut in, sharp, nervous now. "Enough, Diana." Julia didn't say another word. She looked at Thomas, really looked at him. And in that moment, she knew her marriage was already over. It hadn't ended with shouting. It ended in silence, in the way someone else felt comfortable wearing her skin. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Julia just stood there, surrounded by betrayal, drenched in silence. Thomas shifted nervously. Diana pulled the robe tighter, almost smug. But Julia, she didn't blink. She reached slowly for the wine bag, still trembling in her hand, lifted it, and then she threw it, hard. The bottle hit the wall with a crack and burst. Red wine sprayed across the white paint like blood. The chocolates scattered. And for one long, suspended moment, no one said a word. Not Diana, not Thomas, not even Julia. Because what do you say when your world splits open and nothing makes sense anymore? She turned, walked past Thomas like he didn't exist, past Diana like she was made of air, through the door, down the hallway, barefoot, her feet against the cold floor realer than anything she'd felt in weeks. The building lights buzzed above her. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes burned with clarity. By the time she reached the street, her mind was already made up. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to fight for a man who had so easily replaced her. No, she was going to fight for something better, for herself, for her son. At her friend Vicky's apartment, she found Ryan curled up on the couch, hugging his stuffed fox already asleep. Julia knelt beside him, brushed the hair from his forehead. She didn't say a word. But inside her mind, the vow was clear. This ends tonight. Whatever came next would be hers to build. The city outside never slept. But Julia did. She sat in the corner of Vicky's small living room, knees pulled to her chest, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of tea. The tea had gone cold hours ago. Bitter, forgotten, just like she felt. Ryan was fast asleep on the pull-out couch, his little body curled around his stuffed fox like it was his only lifeline. His chest rose and fell slowly, rhythmically. Peaceful, innocent. She envied him for that. She watched him for a long time, long enough for the streetlights to shift and cast new shapes across his sleeping face. She hadn't said much to Vicky when she arrived. Just the look in her eyes had been enough, and Vicky, bless her, didn't ask questions. She handed Julia a blanket and some tea, then tiptoed off to her room. Now alone in the silence, Julia's mind raced through the wreckage. The laugh, the voice, the robe, the wine shattering. She could still hear it all, still feel it. Every second of that betrayal was branded into her memory like a second-degree burn. But what scared her most wasn't the cheating. It was how numb she felt now. No rage, no tears, just exhaustion, like her soul had collapsed inward. She looked at Ryan again, his small face so peaceful, unaware of the chaos that had just rewritten their future. He deserved better. She whispered it aloud, more to herself than anyone. He deserves better than this. Then, for the first time that night, she let the truth hit her. She had no plan, no house, no stability, no direction, just one clarity. They weren't going back. This was the end of Boston, the end of Thomas, the end of letting life happen to her. Tomorrow would be different, somehow. The sun hadn't risen yet, but something inside Julia had. She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers laced tightly, her gaze locked on the sleeping form of her son. Ryan stirred once, clutching his fox tighter, then fell still again. Julia looked away. Then she said it. Not in anger, not in a dramatic outburst, but in a voice quiet and steady like a gavel falling in a courtroom. "We're done with Boston." The words felt final and free. She didn't flinch. She reached for Vicky's old laptop resting on the coffee table. The screen lit up, casting a cold glow on her face. Her hands moved slowly at first, then faster. Search bar. Quiet towns to raise a child, she scrolled. Nothing felt right. Nothing clicked. Until one image stopped her. A house. Old. Wooden. Wrapped in fog. A wraparound porch. Apple trees. Mountains in the background. Vermont. Her heart stirred. She clicked the listing. A farmhouse just outside a town she'd never heard of. It looked weathered but warm. Too cheap for its size. Too charming to ignore. She leaned in. Read the description. Owner terminally ill. Looking for someone to care for property until sale is finalized. Julia blinked. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this fate or just desperation talking? She stared at the photo again. The front door, the porch swing. It felt like the kind of place where pain could melt into quiet, where she could build something new from the ashes. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered something not out of fear, but out of fragile hope. This could be it. She stared at the listing longer than she meant to. Something about it wouldn't let her scroll past. There was no virtual tour, no video walkthrough, just 5 still photos. The first one was grainy, taken from across a gravel road. The house was white, peeling at the edges, with a porch that wrapped around like open arms. A single wooden swing hung slightly crooked, as if someone had just left it swaying. In the background, rolling hills, tall grass, and a sliver of distant mountain. It looked forgotten, untouched, but not unloved. It looked like a place that had waited for someone, for years. The second photo was the front steps. Weathered wood. 2 potted plants, dead but still there, like someone had once cared, and maybe still did. The third photo was a kitchen. Old-fashioned, cast-iron stove. No granite, no chrome, but there was something warm in the light spilling through the curtain. Something honest. The last 2 pictures showed a narrow hallway and a small upstairs room with a window looking out onto trees. No fancy angles, no editing, just real. Julia's fingers hovered over the mouse pad. She didn't know why she hesitated. Maybe because it felt too good to be true, or maybe because for the first time, something felt right. She whispered the name aloud, Finch House. And the moment she said it, something inside her shifted, like a door had opened quietly inside her chest. The house listing didn't include much, just a name, Walter Finch, and a phone number. No realtor, no company name, just him. Julia hesitated. It was almost 4 a.m., but something in her chest whispered, "Call him, now." She picked up Vicky's phone. Hers was still at home on a counter stained with red wine. She dialed. It rang, twice. Then a voice. Old, worn down. Walter Finch speaking. Julia didn't expect someone to answer. She certainly didn't expect someone to sound like that. There was no coldness in his voice, no sales pitch, just a man. Tired, breathing heavily, and waiting for someone to ask why. Julia cleared her throat. "Hi, Mr. Finch. I saw the listing. The farmhouse." A pause. Then softly, "Ah, yes. You sound young. Do you have children?" "One," she said. "A boy. He's 7." Another pause. A cough. "I'm dying," he said plainly. "They say lung cancer. Late stage. Don't know how much time I've got, but I want to sell and stay until it's over." His words weren't dramatic. They were tired, simple, as if he'd rehearsed them so many times they'd lost their weight. Julia felt her throat tighten, not out of fear, but because somehow she understood. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be," Walter replied, almost with a smile in his voice. "It's the only home I have left. I don't want it to die with me." Julia gripped the phone tighter. She didn't know this man, didn't know the town, didn't even know what she was doing. But for the first time since her marriage shattered, she wasn't running from something, she was moving towards something that hadn't hurt her yet, something that maybe could heal. They arrived just before sunset. The road to Finch House wound through trees that looked like they belonged in a painting, fiery orange, deep red, fading gold. Julia's SUV crunched over gravel as the house came into view, and there it was, exactly as in the photo. White, peeling paint, a porch that wrapped around the front like arms half opened in welcome. A swing moved slightly in the breeze, not much, just enough to whisper, "You made it." Ryan sat up in the back seat. "Is this it?" he asked, his voice soft. Julia nodded. "Yeah, this is it." Walter Finch stood on the porch, leaning on a cane. His frame was tall, but his shoulders stooped just slightly. White hair combed neatly back, a faded flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans. When Julia stepped out of the car, he raised one hand in greeting. "You must be Dr. Summers." His voice was, as she remembered, gravelly, tired, but kind. She offered a handshake. "Just Julia," she smiled. Ryan stepped out slowly, clutching his stuffed fox. He stuck close to her leg, peeking out from behind her coat. Walter crouched just a little despite his cane. "And this must be young Mr. Ryan." Ryan didn't say anything at first, just stared. Then he smiled. Small, quick, but real. Julia's breath caught. It had been weeks since she'd seen that. Walter smiled back, eyes twinkling. "He looks like the boy from my books," Ryan whispered finally. Walter chuckled. "That's good. Boys in books tend to be brave." And just like that, the house didn't feel so foreign anymore. The door creaked open like it had been waiting. Not with resistance, but with recognition, as if it remembered what it meant to welcome someone in. Walter stepped aside, motioning gently. "Come on in. It ain't fancy, but she's got good bones." Julia stepped inside, holding Ryan's hand. The air smelled like wood and something older. Not dust, something deeper, like old paper, and baked apples, and time. The floorboards groaned beneath their steps. Not like a complaint, more like a whisper. "We're still here. We've seen things. We remember." Julia turned slowly, taking in the narrow hallway, the heavy beams, the fading floral wallpaper curling at the edges. The house didn't try to impress. It didn't pretend. It simply existed, alive in its own way. It creaked as they moved softly, as if every corner had a memory to share. Ryan let go of her hand. For the first time since Boston, he walked forward on his own, drawn toward something. The kitchen, the staircase, the wide front window. Walter watched from the doorway. "She talks, you know," he said. "The house. She creaks and sighs and moans when the wind pushes through her ribs. Some people don't like it. Me, I think it's proof she's still breathing." Julia almost smiled. She looked toward the orchard, visible through the dusty glass. The apple trees swayed gently, gold leaves catching the light. The wind moved through them like a song. And somehow she felt it. The house, the land, the memories, all breathing, all waiting, and maybe, just maybe, forgiving. Later that evening, after the bags had been brought in and the first wave of uncertainty had passed, Walter lit a fire in the hearth. The flames crackled gently, chasing away the chill that crept in from the October wind. Ryan sat cross-legged on the rug, holding his stuffed fox in one arm, a book in the other. Walter lowered himself carefully into the old rocking chair near the fire. "You like stories?" he asked. Ryan nodded. "Adventure ones, not the baby kind." Walter chuckled. "Good, I don't read baby books." He reached into a wooden crate near the fireplace and pulled out a leather-bound volume with golden letters flaking at the corners. This one's about a boy who finds a map inside a library book. Ryan's eyes widened. Julia leaned in the doorway watching. She didn't say anything. Didn't want to break the moment. Walter's voice was gravelly but steady. As he read, the fire popped and danced, casting shadows on the walls like moving illustrations. Ryan's gaze stayed fixed on him, hanging on every word. And something in Julia softened. It was so small at first she almost missed it. A loosening, like something inside her chest had unclenched. No pager, no heart monitor, no Thomas. Just a boy, a fire, and a stranger who didn't feel like a stranger anymore. For the first time in a long, long time, Julia felt peace. Not because life was perfect, but because for one sacred moment, nothing was broken. At first, it was just a cough, a dry one, barely noticeable under the sound of the fireplace crackling or Ryan's laughter echoing through the orchard. But then it got louder and longer. One night, while they were playing cards at the kitchen table, Walter doubled over mid-laugh, clutching his chest. Julia stood up instantly. "You okay?" Walter waved her off. "Just these lungs of mine. They've got more rust than metal these days." He tried to make it a joke, but Julia didn't laugh, because she had heard that cough before. Not in old men telling tall tales, but in emergency rooms, in waiting rooms thick with grief. It was the kind of cough that whispered something deeper, and yet she said nothing, because Walter had already told her. Late-stage lung cancer, he'd said. No treatment, just time. Still, her instincts nagged her. Like a small rock in her shoe she couldn't shake. Something didn't feel right. The timing, the symptoms, the way he moved, the way his voice never quite matched the words. It was a feeling, but in her line of work, a feeling was everything. That night, she stood in the kitchen alone, the window slightly cracked, letting in the night breeze, and she whispered into the dark, "What if he's wrong?" The wind didn't answer, but the question stayed. It started with a drawer, a simple, wooden, slightly warped, tucked beneath Walter's roll-top desk. He opened it one afternoon while looking for stamps, and there it was, a manila folder, faded, stuffed with paper. He handed it to Julia casually. "That's the whole mess," he said, "if it helps you understand what I'm dealing with." She didn't open it right away. She waited until that night after Ryan had gone to bed and Walter had dozed off by the fire, a book still open in his lap. Julia sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the lamp above. She opened the folder, and immediately something felt wrong. The first page was a typed letter from Dr. Alan Monroe. Probable terminal lung carcinoma. No staging, no scan results, no biopsy, no second opinion. Just a phrase that felt heavy yet hollow. She flipped through the rest. Scans were low-resolution printouts. Some were blurry. The notes were vague. Scattered timelines. No treatment plan. No recorded discussion about options. Not even a confirmed diagnosis. Just assumptions dressed as certainty. Julia's hand slowly closed into a fist. This wasn't medicine. It was manipulation. She looked toward the living room where Walter slept soundly unaware, and she whispered to herself, voice sharp, cold, "No, something's not right." She reached for her phone. It was time to call in a second opinion. Julia didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The folder lay closed on the kitchen table, but her mind stayed wide open, racing, replaying. By morning, she had made a decision. She scanned every single page of Walter's file, then sent them to someone she trusted more than anyone else in the world of medicine, Dr. Ellen Patel, chief pulmonologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, an old mentor, brilliant, blunt. The subject line of Julia's email was short. Urgent, second opinion, rural misdiagnosis suspected. She didn't add context, didn't want to influence Ellen's reading. She just ended with, "Please tell me what you see." No sugarcoating. Then she hit send and waited. Minutes turned into hours. She tried to distract herself, making tea, organizing the spice drawer, helping Ryan with a puzzle. But her mind always circled back to the same quiet question, what if Walter isn't dying? That night, her phone buzzed. Ellen had replied. Only 3 lines. Got your files, read them twice. This isn't cancer. Call me. Now. Julia stood frozen, and for the first time in days, hope didn't feel foolish. It felt possible. Julia stepped outside to take the call. The Vermont sky was bruised purple. Cicadas hummed. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. Then Ellen's voice came through, calm, steady, razor sharp. "Julia, I've reviewed everything twice. This isn't cancer." Julia didn't move, didn't breathe. "It's chronic bronchitis, mildly advanced, but very treatable." Silence, birdsong in the trees, and then Julia exhaled so hard her knees nearly buckled. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'd stake my license on it." That doctor, either he's criminally negligent or someone wanted this man out of that house. Julia's stomach dropped. The air suddenly felt colder. "You need to ask Walter who referred him to Dr. Monroe. There's something off here." Julia stared at the orchard beyond the fence. The leaves rustled like whispers. She thought of Walter, sitting by the fire, trusting. And then she said, with a voice low and steady, "They lied to him." Ellen paused. Worse, they used his fear to push him out. And just like that, Julia wasn't just trying to rebuild her life anymore. She had a purpose, a fire. Julia didn't confront Walter, not yet. Instead, she drove into town the next morning with purpose, to the clinic. She told the nurse she had follow-up questions about Walter's prescription. The nurse nodded and left to find Dr. Monroe. Julia waited in the hallway. Then she heard it, muffled voices behind Monroe's door. "We've already lined up Cole's investment. Once Finch signs over the deed..." A pause. "I don't care what she suspects. We need that land before the rezoning vote." Julia froze. Cole rezoning a deed? She edged closer. The door was slightly ajar. "He thinks he's dying. Let him think that. The house is worth 5 times what he's asking. And once it's part of the resort plan, we're millionaires." Julia stepped back, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just medical negligence. This was orchestrated manipulation of fear, illness, and desperation, just like Thomas Monroe had used lies to take control. Julia clenched her jaw. She knew this feeling, the taste of betrayal, but this time she wouldn't run. This time she would fight. It came in a thick envelope, no return address, just her name written in that cold, slanted script she once thought elegant. Julia opened it slowly. Inside, 2 things: divorce papers and a transfer of ownership form. She blanked. 51% of Thomas's company transferred to her. There was a post-it note, his handwriting. "Since you're so good at fixing hearts, here's a broken business. Good luck." Julia's hand trembled, not from sadness, from fury. She scanned the documents again. The company was drowning in debt, near bankruptcy. If she signed, she'd become the majority owner and legally responsible for every cent of the collapse. "He wants to sink me with him," she whispered. Thomas hadn't just betrayed her heart. Now he wanted to drag her into financial ruin, hide behind her license, her clean name. It was strategic, cruel, deliberate. And for the first time in weeks, Julia laughed. But it was the kind of laugh that cut through glass, cold, icy. "He thinks I'm still the same woman he left barefoot in the hallway." She folded the papers and whispered to herself, "Let's play." Julia sat across from the only man she trusted now, her attorney, Daniel Mendez. He read through the divorce packet silently, jaw tightening with every page. Then he looked up. "Julia, this isn't a gift. It's a setup." She raised an eyebrow. "Thought so." Daniel tossed the ownership form onto the table. "He's transferring 51% to you, so when the bankruptcy hits, you'll be liable for everything: taxes, lawsuits, creditors. And guess what? You can't claim you were tricked. It's all technically legal." Julia stared at the paper. It was like Thomas's affair all over again. Not messy, but meticulously cruel. "He wants me to sink publicly while he disappears quietly," she muttered. Daniel nodded. "Classic financial sabotage. He's trying to smear your record so you can't rebuild." Julia took a deep breath. "But what if I don't just refuse?" Daniel looked confused. She leaned in. What if I take the 51% and blow the whole scam wide open? Daniel blinked. You want to walk into the trap and turn it into a weapon, Julia smiled. Cold, calculated. He underestimated the wrong woman. The storm broke not in the sky, but in Julia's mind. For days, she'd been too buried in damage control to question the design behind it all. Now it hit her hard, fast, and cold. Thomas didn't just want to hurt her emotionally. He wanted her gone. But why transfer 51% to her if the company was already drowning? Why was Monroe, a doctor, part of a real estate game? Why was Walter lied to, manipulated into selling his family home? And why was that home, Finch House, the common link in it all? She opened her laptop, searched Richard Cole Investments, Vermont. Page after page of property deals appeared, all recent, all in towns with failed clinics, all with suspiciously cheap land. And in the center of every deal, the same names Cole, Monroe, and Thomas. Julia pushed back from her chair. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't about heartbreak. It was a real estate scheme. Big money, quiet buyouts, silent victims. And Finch House was their final piece. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated how far a mother and a doctor will go when you try to steal her home, her child's safety, and her name. The night was silent, but Julia's hands were not. They were steady. For the first time since that bedroom betrayal, she felt no shaking, no tears, no fear, just fire. She dialed his number. Thomas picked up after 2 rings, voice smug, confident, like he still thought he had her cornered. "Julia," he said casually, "I assume you got the papers. Just sign and I'll make sure." She cut in. "No." Silence. "I'm not signing anything," she said, voice as sharp as glass. "And I know what you did." "Excuse me. I know about Finch House. I know about Cole, Monroe, the fake cancer, the land grab." He chuckled. "Julia, you've always been dramatic." She didn't flinch. "I was your shield, Thomas, your perfect image, the wife who smiled, nodded, signed things she didn't read." Another pause. "I'm not your shield anymore." He tried to speak. She hung up. And in that moment, with her finger still on the end button, Julia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Power. The betrayal wasn't personal anymore. It was systemic. And that meant it could be exposed. This wasn't revenge. This was war. It started with a list. Then it became a folder. Then a stack. Then a storm. Julia and her lawyer Maya sat in the small library next to Finch House, a room that once smelled of dust and old paper, now buzzing with voices, testimonies, and truths buried for years. "I was told I had stomach cancer," one woman whispered. "It was an ulcer." "My husband was told he had Parkinson's. He didn't. He had a pinched nerve." Case by case, paper by paper. Monroe hadn't just misdiagnosed Walter. He'd built an empire of fear, turning small ailments into terminal tragedies. And every patient he misled had one thing in common. They all lived on land developers wanted. Julia wasn't just a mother now, or a doctor, or a woman betrayed. She was becoming something else, something dangerous to people who profited off silence. And the silence was about to end. The town hall smelled of old wood and fresh anger, dozens of chairs, dozens of folded arms, dozens of pairs of eyes once filled with doubt, now burning with clarity. Julia stood before them, flanked by Maya and Walter. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. "Dr. Monroe misdiagnosed not just one of you," she said calmly, "but at least 14. Gasps, murmurs, a trembling hand rose. "I lost my farm because I thought I was dying." Another voice. "He told me my daughter had a tumor. It was a cyst." Testimony after testimony, the truth spilled like floodwater. Decades of trust eroded in minutes. And then Monroe walked in, smiling, calm. Until he saw the crowd, until he saw the folder Julia held, until someone yelled, "How much did Cole pay you to kill our town?" His smile faltered. The whispers turned into shouts. The town, once broken by fear, was now united by fury, and Monroe's kingdom began to fall. The orchard was quiet. Leaves rustled like whispers of ghosts past. Walter sat on the porch staring at the mountains, the same view he thought he'd say goodbye to soon. Julia stepped outside, holding a folder. She didn't speak at first. She just sat beside him. And then softly, "Walter, you don't have cancer." He blinked, then blinked again, then whispered, "What?" "It's chronic bronchitis. Treatable. You're not dying." For a moment, Walter didn't move. Then his shoulders trembled. His face crumpled. He wept. Not out of fear, but because for the first time in months, he had a future. "You gave me back my life, Julia." She smiled, eyes welling. "No," she said, "you gave me a reason to fight again." In that quiet corner of Vermont, two souls, one scarred by betrayal, one by lies, healed each other with nothing more than truth and time. The town council chamber was packed, standing room only. Reporters, locals, farmers, shopkeepers, mothers holding their children, and Julia in a navy blue blazer with calm fire in her eyes. Across the room, Monroe, pale, Cole fuming. The council president cleared his throat. "Ms. Julia Hart, you may speak." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out the timeline, the misdiagnosis, the financial pressure, the secret meetings. Then she passed around the medical files, the email transcripts, and one damning voice recording. Gasps, a stunned silence. Then the questions began, not for Julia, but for Monroe, for Cole. Why was Walter Finch told he had cancer with no biopsy? Why did 5 families sell land below market value after seeing Dr. F? Monroe, why does your firm own the deeds now, Mr. Cole? They had no answers. The council didn't hesitate. Effective immediately, Dr. Monroe is suspended pending formal investigation, and Richard Cole is hereby referred to state authorities for potential criminal conspiracy. Julia exhaled, not in triumph, in relief, because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who'd ever been silenced, gaslit, or cornered. And the woman they tried to bury, she didn't just rise, she exposed them all. Golden leaves danced in the breeze as the orchard lit up with lanterns. Pumpkins lined the path. Children ran between hay bales, their giggles echoing into the warm October air. Tables overflowed with apple cider pies and gratitude. Tonight wasn't just a celebration, it was a thank you. Walter sat bundled in a chair beneath the biggest apple tree, a plaid blanket on his knees. He looked healthier, brighter, lighter. And beside him, Julia, in a rust-red sweater, holding a mug of cider, surrounded by neighbors who no longer saw her as the outsider. They saw her as the woman who saved them all. The mayor stood up to speak. "This town has seen darkness, but we've also seen the light, and her name is Julia Hart." The crowd erupted in applause. Ryan clung to Julia's side, smiling, truly smiling. And Walter wiped his eyes, whispering, "You turned this old place into something alive again." Then, one by one, families came up to share stories. Stories of being misdiagnosed. Stories of being afraid to speak. Stories of how Julia changed everything. Under the canopy of apple trees lit by hundreds of soft lanterns, the town found something it hadn't felt in years: hope. The paper crinkled softly in his hand. "Look, Mom," Ryan beamed, holding up a spelling test with a bright red 100% scribbled at the top. Julian kneeled beside him. "You did it!" And he ran through the orchard past the barn, laughter bursting from him like it hadn't in months. For the first time since Boston, Ryan didn't ask when they were going back. He didn't mention his old school. He didn't draw sad pictures. Instead, he taped that test to the fridge like it was a trophy, crooked, messy, but perfect. Then he raced outside again, arms stretched wide, chasing a leaf like it was magic. Walter watched from the porch, sipping cider, his eyes misty. "That kid's finally breathing," he said. Julia sat beside him, heart full, hands still shaking from everything they'd been through. But in that moment, watching her son disappear into a golden field, she felt something settle deep inside. They were home. The wind whispered through the apple trees, carrying the scent of fall and the echo of laughter from the field. Inside, Walter sat on his old chair near the fireplace, a wool blanket draped over his legs. Julia entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of cider. She offered one. He didn't take it. Instead, he held out a small brass key, worn old with a faded red tag. "For the attic," he said. "I think it's time." Julia hesitated. "Walter, You kept me alive, Julia. You didn't just treat me. You saw me when no one else did." His voice cracked. "And this house, she's not just wood and windows. She's memory, she's healing, and she needs someone like you to keep her alive." Julia looked at the key. It felt heavier than metal. It felt like a promise. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "Just say you'll stay." Later that night, Julia climbed to the attic. She opened the door. Dust swirled in the golden light. There were trunks of old photographs, letters, drawings, generations of memory sealed in time. And on the windowsill, carved faintly into the wood, "A home is not where you live, it's where you heal." Julia wept. Then she laughed, and downstairs Ryan yelled, "Mom, come see this." She turned. And for the first time in her life, not as a wife, not as a doctor, not as someone running, but simply as Julia, she walked down the stairs into a life that was finally hers. The leaves in Vermont had turned golden fire. The orchard, once silent, now echoed with laughter. And inside Finch House, once haunted by shadows, there was music, warmth, and light. Julia stood on the porch, watching Ryan run with the neighbor kids through rows of apple trees. Her hand brushed against the old railing Walter used to lean on. She smiled, but her eyes brimmed with tears. "This house," she whispered, "it's not just wood and stone. It's every scar I carried, and every step I took to heal." She turned to go inside and paused. Framed in the hallway was a photo Ryan had taken. Julia, Walter, and Ryan sitting on the porch, 3 generations tied not by blood, but by love. Below it, on a small plaque, the words, "Sometimes a broken heart isn't the end. It's where real healing begins." Julia touched the frame gently. She had lost a husband, a city, and a version of herself she thought she needed to survive. But in losing everything, she found home. Sometimes life breaks us in places we never expected. Betrayal, loss, injustice. But healing doesn't start with revenge. It begins with truth, with courage, and with choosing peace, even when chaos demands a response. Julia's story teaches us that you don't need to scream to fight back. You don't need to destroy others to rebuild yourself. You just need to stand your ground, believe in your worth, and walk even barefoot towards something better. Because healing isn't about what you lost. It's about what you choose to become after the storm. If this story moved you even just a little, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We uncover the strength in pain, the beauty in truth, and the power of starting over. Subscribe now. Your next story might be the one that saves you.